Welcome to our channel, where we calmly unravel the profound stories hidden behind the veil of time. In the early 1990s, he was the face of childhood friendship for an entire generation. With his thick glasses and quiet awkwardness, Paul Pfeiffer was a weekly fixture in millions of American homes. He was the safe choice, the loyal best friend we all related to. Yet, when the cameras stopped rolling in 1993, the global fame was replaced by a chilling silence. A 17-year-old boy decided he had already lived his Hollywood life. He didn't fade into desperate reality television. He didn't spiral into tabloid controversies. And he certainly didn't snap and become a controversial shock rocker. Instead, he executed one of the quietest and most deliberate exits in television history. So, what really happened to Paul Pfeiffer from the Wonder Years? Before we begin, please share where and at what time you are tuning in. Drop any untold facts about him in the comments, and kindly forgive any minor errors as we sympathize with the immense pressures this young man endured. Now let us step back in time. The actual trajectory of Josh Saviano's life involves no shocking transformations or self-destruction. The real story is fundamentally about identity. It is an examination of a young man who recognized the mechanics of the Hollywood machine, understood the psychological trap of his own fame, and made a calculated, highly rational decision to walk away. His successful exit from television was rooted in his beginnings. Born in White Plains, New York, in 1976, Josh Saviano was not bred to be a product of the Hollywood wholesome factory. White Plains, a suburban city in Westchester County, offered a standard upper-middle-class environment far removed from the hyper-competitive, pressurized atmosphere of Los Angeles child acting circles. His entry into the entertainment industry was not the result of relentless stage parents pushing him into the spotlight to fulfill their own thwarted ambitions. He was a normal child who found his way into acting naturally, treating it initially as an interesting extracurricular activity rather than a high-stakes career path. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, the commercial acting industry in New York was a massive enterprise. Advertising agencies constantly required child actors for national campaigns. Saviano began his career here, securing minor roles in television commercials. The New York commercial circuit was demanding, requiring discipline and the ability to take direction from adults. But it lacked the identity-consuming nature of Los Angeles television production. In New York, a child actor could shoot a toothpaste commercial on a Tuesday and return to a normal public school classroom on a Wednesday. This environment allowed Saviano to build a professional work ethic without losing his grounding in reality. By the mid-1980s, the American television landscape was preparing for a significant paradigm shift. For decades, the standard format for family entertainment was the multi-camera sitcom. Shows were filmed on brightly lit sound stages in front of live studio audiences, accompanied by laugh tracks. The children on these shows were often highly polished, theatrical, and prone to delivering sharp punchlines that no actual 10-year-old would ever say. The industry prized a specific type of glossy perfection. However, audience tastes were maturing. The baby boomer generation, now entering middle age and raising children of their own, controlled the consumer market. Network executives recognized a growing demand for nostalgia and authenticity. Creators Neil Marlins and Carol Black developed a concept for a new type of television show for the ABC network. It would be a single-camera comedy drama devoid of a laugh track, set 20 years in the past. It would explore the turbulence of the late 1960s through the specific, narrow perspective of an average suburban adolescent boy. The project was titled The Wonder Years. To make this concept work, the casting had to be flawless. The creators could not use the standard, hyper-articulate child actors of the era. They needed children who looked and sounded like real children. The characters had to possess a genuine, unpolished quality. The search for the main character, Kevin Arnold, led them to Fred Savage. But Kevin needed a counterbalance. He needed a best friend who could anchor the narrative, someone who represented the physical and social awkwardness of puberty without turning the character into a cheap caricature. The casting directors reviewed hundreds of young actors for the role of Paul Pfeiffer. Many tried to play the nerd stereotype, exaggerating their clumsiness or adopting artificial voices. Josh Saviano stood out because he did not have to manufacture the awkwardness. He simply channeled the genuine reality of being a 12-year-old boy. He wore glasses, he was thin, he possessed a natural intelligence and a slightly cautious demeanor. When he read the lines, he did not deliver them as jokes. He delivered them as the serious concerns of a kid trying to survive middle school. The network recognized the immediate chemistry between Savage and Saviano. It was not a dynamic built on comedic timing, but on a believable mutual reliance. In 1988, Saviano was officially cast as Paul Pfeiffer. He relocated from the grounded reality of New York to the epicenter of the global entertainment industry in Los Angeles. He was no longer just a kid doing commercials. He was the co-star of a heavily promoted network television series. The premiere of The Wonder Years in January 1988, immediately following the Super Bowl, guaranteed an enormous initial audience. The critical and commercial response was overwhelmingly positive. The show struck a precise chord with the American public, offering a sanitized but emotionally resonant look back at a defining era of American history. Almost overnight, the core cast members were thrust into a level of visibility that is difficult to quantify. Saviano was suddenly subjected to the intense machinery of late 1980s television marketing. His face, specifically his character's face, was broadcast into millions of homes every week. This marked the beginning of a profound psychological challenge. The industry had found exactly what it needed in Saviano, a highly competent professional young actor who perfectly embodied a specific archetype. But in doing so, they initiated a process that would systematically attempt to replace the real teenager from New York with the fictional construct of Paul Pfeiffer. The architecture of the television sidekick had been rigidly established long before the premiere of this specific series. Historically in American broadcasting, the best friend character served a highly utilitarian purpose. They existed to deliver punchlines, to provide comic relief when the main plot became too heavy, or to serve as a convenient sounding board for the protagonist to explain their internal monologue aloud. The sidekick was rarely afforded their own internal life, their own complex motivations, or their own serious narrative arcs. They were functional rather than emotional components of the script. When the writers constructed the character of Paul Pfeiffer, they actively discarded this traditional blueprint. They required a character who could match the emotional weight of the series, which sought to explore the genuine turbulence of adolescence, set against the backdrop of the late 1960s. Paul was not designed to be the punchline. He was designed to be the anchor. If Kevin Arnold represented the emotionally volatile and often irrational impulses of youth, Paul stood as the voice of reason. He possessed a precocious wisdom that often contrasted sharply with his physical awkwardness. The character was written with a multitude of vulnerabilities. He was plagued by severe allergies, he was unathletic, and he lacked the traditional markers of adolescent masculinity that defined social hierarchy in middle school. Yet the writers, and more importantly Josh Saviano, infused him with a quiet dignity. When Saviano delivered his lines, he did not play the character for pity or for cheap laughs. He played him with absolute sincerity. This approach grounded the show. It demonstrated that vulnerability and intelligence could coexist, and that a character did not need to be physically dominant to be essential to the narrative. This nuanced portrayal created a profound parasocial relationship between the audience and the character. A parasocial relationship occurs when viewers develop a one-sided psychological bond with a media figure, investing emotional energy, interest, and time into a persona who does not know they exist. For millions of viewers, Paul Pfeiffer ceased to be a fictional construct. He became a proxy for their own childhood best friends, or for some, he became the friend they wished they had. The audience projected their own memories of growing up, of navigating the treacherous hallways of junior high school, and of dealing with the confusing transition from childhood to adolescence directly onto Saviano. Because the show was entirely viewed through the lens of nostalgia, the connection felt intensely personal to the viewers. They were not simply watching a television show, they were revisiting their own pasts, and Paul was the trusted companion on that journey. The cultural impact of this dynamic cannot be overstated. During its peak, the Wonder Years commanded a massive share of the viewing public. It was a subject of daily conversation in schools and workplaces across the country. The central friendship was analyzed and celebrated because it felt remarkably authentic. It captured the specific reality of boys growing up together, where affection is rarely spoken aloud, but is demonstrated through shared experiences, silent understandings, and mutual endurance of the trials of youth. Saviano managed to capture the specific cadence of a smart kid who knows he is out of place, but refuses to change who he is to fit in. This resonated deeply with a massive demographic of viewers who had felt similarly marginalized in their own youth. However, this exact authenticity, which made the show a critical and commercial triumph, began to exact a specific psychological toll on the young actor. The daily reality of shooting a single-camera network drama is grueling. It involves 12 to 14-hour days, a relentless schedule of blocking, lighting, and filming, interspersed with mandatory hours of on-set tutoring required by child labor laws. Saviano was spending his most formative years effectively isolated from a normal teenage existence. While his peers in New York were attending school dances, joining sports teams, and making the standard mistakes of adolescence, Saviano was on a soundstage in California, repeatedly performing a curated version of youth. Furthermore, there was a constant dissonance between the era he was portraying and the era he was actually living in. On camera, he was dealing with the cultural shifts of 1968, the Vietnam War, the space race, and the changing social dynamics of the American suburb. Off camera, he was a teenager in the early 1990s, navigating the intense scrutiny of the modern entertainment industry. This industry operates largely as a marketing machine, and it quickly recognized the value of the show's young cast. The faces of the actors were plastered across magazine covers, merchandise, and promotional materials, but there was a distinct difference in how they were marketed. While his co-star was positioned as a traditional teen idol, Saviano was marketed strictly as his character. The teen magazines of the era, relentless in their output, needed to categorize everyone to sell copy. Saviano was categorized permanently as the safe, nerdy best friend. The public relations apparatus surrounding the show reinforced this image. When he made public appearances or gave interviews, reporters rarely asked him about his own interests, his own ambitions, or his own life. They asked him about Paul. They asked him about allergies he did not actually have, and about character dynamics that were written by adults sitting in a writer's room. The industry was not interested in Josh Saviano, the young man from New York. They were exclusively interested in Paul Pfeiffer, the lucrative intellectual property owned by the network. This relentless external pressure inevitably leads to a phenomenon known as identity foreclosure. In developmental psychology, identity foreclosure occurs when an individual adopts a specific identity or role without having the opportunity to explore other options. For child actors, this is a common and often destructive occupational hazard. The world tells them exactly who they are supposed to be, and what their value is before their own personalities have had a chance to fully form. The financial rewards and the public adulation create a powerful incentive to accept this assigned identity. It is far easier to become the character the world loves than to undergo the difficult, messy process of discovering oneself. Many young actors caught in this trap simply surrender to it. They allow the character to consume their public and private lives, resulting in a stunted emotional development that often collapses catastrophically when the roles dry up and the industry moves on to the next generation of fresh faces. But Saviano possessed a strong foundational grounding, likely rooted in his early life before the show and the support system he maintained outside the Hollywood bubble. As he moved through his teenage years on the set, he began to acutely recognize the boundaries of the box he had been placed in. He saw that the industry viewed his intelligence and his professionalism not as tools for future diverse roles, but merely as mechanisms to continue generating the same specific character archetype. The public reinforced this limitation daily. When he walked down the street, strangers did not greet him by his real name. They shouted the name of his character. They expected him to act, behave, and speak exactly like the boy on their television screens. It is a peculiar and suffocating form of fame, where the adulation is entirely dependent on the complete erasure of the actual human being receiving it. Saviano was achieving immense success, but the success belonged to someone who did not exist. The cognitive dissonance of being globally recognized while feeling entirely unseen is a unique psychological burden. As the series progressed into its later seasons, the characters began to age out of the initial premise. The cute awkwardness of middle school gave way to the more complex and less universally charming realities of late high school. The writers struggled to maintain the specific tone of the early years. Behind the scenes, the young actors were also outgrowing their roles. They were young adults eager to move forward with their lives, but contractually obligated to remain in a fictionalized past. For Saviano, the approaching end of the series was not a tragedy to be mourned, but a rapidly approaching deadline for a critical life decision. He was fully aware of the statistics surrounding former child stars. He knew the typical trajectory involved a desperate clinging to fame, a transition into increasingly minor roles, and a constant battle against typecasting. Casting directors lack imagination. They look for proven commodities. For the rest of his acting career, any casting director looking at Saviano would see the shadow of his famous character standing right behind him. They would see the thick glasses even if he was not wearing them. They would hear the slightly nasal delivery even if he spoke with absolute command. He understood that staying in Los Angeles meant committing to a decade of trying to convince an industry to unsee the very thing that made him famous. The alternative was a complete departure. It required walking away from guaranteed income, significant social status, and the only professional environment he had known for half his life. It was a choice between comfortable stagnation within a fabricated identity and the terrifying but necessary pursuit of genuine autonomy. The year 1993 marked a definitive transition in American popular culture. The earnest nostalgia that had fueled the success of family dramas in the late 80s was being rapidly replaced by a more cynical, detached worldview. The grunge movement had fundamentally altered the music industry, and television was pivoting toward shows that reflected a sharper, more sarcastic urban reality. The cultural appetite for a gentle retrospective on suburban life in the 1960s was waning. The network executives, analyzing shifting demographics and declining viewership numbers, made a swift and unsentimental business calculation. The Wonder Years was abruptly canceled. For the majority of the cast and crew, this cancellation was a jarring shock. A television production running for 6 seasons functions essentially as a small, highly insular corporation. Hundreds of people depend on it for their livelihoods. When the final clapperboard snapped shut on the set, it was a deeply emotional moment for the adults involved. They were losing a stable income and a close-knit community. But for Josh Saviano, the end of the series did not represent a tragic conclusion. It presented an unprecedented opportunity for escape. He was 17 years old, standing on the threshold of legal adulthood. and he possessed a level of foresight rarely seen in the entertainment industry. In the early 1990s, the transition from child actor to adult professional was notoriously brutal. The economic and psychological machinery of the industry offered little room for grace. The public possesses a very specific proprietary feeling over child stars. Audiences freeze these young actors in time, refusing to accept their biological aging. When a child star attempts to take on mature roles, to explore darker themes or adult relationships, the public reaction is often one of visceral rejection. They view it as a betrayal of the innocence they associated with the actor. Saviano looked at the landscape of his peers and saw a minefield. He witnessed other young actors who had achieved massive success simultaneously, desperately trying to shed their childhood images by taking on inappropriate sensationalist roles. He saw them fighting for relevance in independent films that no one watched, or worse, participating in the grueling, humiliating ritual of pilot season. Pilot season in Los Angeles is a period of intense desperation where thousands of actors compete for a handful of roles in new television shows that will likely never air. It is a system designed to erode confidence and reinforce a strict hierarchy of value based entirely on physical appearance and current market trends. The representatives surrounding young actors, the agents, managers, and publicists are incentivized to keep the actor working at all costs. Their income is directly tied to the actor's continued presence on screen. When a hit show ends, the immediate advice from this apparatus is always to strike while the iron is hot. They push the actor into new auditions, lucrative but low-quality commercial endorsements, or spin-off projects to maintain momentum. For a 17-year-old boy, the pressure to conform to the demands of these experienced adults is immense. The actor is the core product of a business, and closing that business down is viewed as an act of financial heresy. Saviano defied this entire infrastructure. He fired the apparatus. He made the conscious, definitive choice to step completely off the conveyor belt. He did not issue a press release expressing a desire to explore new creative avenues. He did not give a tearful interview to an entertainment magazine about the struggles of growing up on camera. He simply stopped participating in the economy of celebrity. He recognized that his current fame was a depreciating asset built on a foundation he no longer wished to maintain. The character of Paul Pfeiffer had provided him with extraordinary financial security, but it was threatening to consume his future. He chose to leverage that financial security to buy the one commodity the entertainment industry routinely denies its participants, which is an entirely private life. His destination was not another television network, but New Haven, Connecticut. Saviano applied and was accepted to Yale University. This transition was not merely a change of address. It was a radical shift in universe. Geographically, Los Angeles and New Haven sit on opposite coasts of the United States. Culturally and psychologically, the distance is immeasurable. Los Angeles is a city built on the manufacturing of illusion. Its primary export is entertainment, and its currency is visibility. It is a city of sound stages, temporary facades, and transactional relationships based on industry status. Yale University represents the antithesis of that environment. It is an institution deeply rooted in history, academic rigor, and intellectual tradition. The architecture itself, Gothic, imposing, and permanent, stands in direct contrast to the flimsy plywood sets of a television studio. At Yale, value is not determined by a casting director or a Nielsen rating. It is determined by intellectual output, rigorous analysis, and the ability to defend a thesis under intense scrutiny by tenured professors who are entirely unimpressed by television credits. Arriving on campus in the fall of 1994, Saviano faced a unique set of challenges. He was not an anonymous freshman. He was a globally recognized face, stepping into a highly concentrated, insular community. The initial reaction from his peers was inevitable. In the dining halls, the libraries, and the dormitories, there were stares, whispers, and the constant realization that the guy sitting across the seminar table was the kid from television. For a newly arrived student trying to establish a serious academic footing, this level of uninvited attention can be incredibly disruptive. The strategy Saviano employed to handle this attention is highly indicative of his character. He did not lean into the celebrity. He did not use his past fame as social currency to gain entry into exclusive campus societies or to seek special treatment from the administration. Conversely, he did not defensively isolate himself or act aggressively toward students who recognized him. He neutralized the fame by being aggressively normal. He attended his lectures, completed his reading assignments, and participated in study groups with the same diligent, unremarkable focus as any other student. When you refuse to perform the role of a celebrity, the public eventually loses interest in treating you like one. By consistently demonstrating that he was there to work, to learn, and to participate in the academic life of the university, he forced his peers to adjust their perception. The novelty of his past wore off, replaced by the reality of his present. Within a short time, he ceased to be Paul Pfeiffer, the television star, and simply became Josh, the political science major. This was not a passive transition. It was an active, deliberate dismantling of a public persona constructed over half a decade. He chose to major in political science, a field that demands a deep understanding of systems, power dynamics, historical precedent, and legal frameworks. This choice is significant. Acting is largely a passive, interpretive art. The actor is given a script written by someone else, told where to stand by a director, and lit by a cinematographer. The actor's job is to execute a vision that is not their own. Political science requires active, critical analysis. It requires the student to dismantle arguments, question authority, and understand the mechanics of how society actually governs itself. Through his studies, Saviano was building a new intellectual architecture for his life. He was learning how to construct a rational argument, how to analyze complex data, and how to communicate with precision and authority. These are skills that rely entirely on individual merit. In the library cramming for midterms at 2 a.m, the fact that he once hit his marks perfectly on a soundstage in Burbank was completely irrelevant. The academic grading system is a strict meritocracy. It does not care about past fame. It only cares about the quality of the work placed in front of it. This environment provided Saviano with the exact mechanism he needed to reclaim his identity. For the first time since he was a young boy, his successes and failures were entirely his own. They were not mediated by publicists, edited by producers, or judged by millions of unseen viewers. If he wrote a brilliant paper, the satisfaction was private and earned. If he struggled with a concept, the frustration was ordinary and human. He was allowed to be imperfect. He was allowed to make mistakes without those mistakes being serialized in tabloid magazines. The profound relief of this ordinary existence cannot be overstated. It allowed him to mature at a natural pace. The mid-1990s on a college campus was a period of intense transition. The internet was just beginning to establish a foothold, changing how information was accessed and shared. The political landscape was shifting. Saviano was immersed in this real-world environment, engaging in debates about policy and law rather than worrying about camera angles and lighting cues. He was quietly shaping his adult identity, far removed from the Hollywood machine. While he was deeply engaged in his studies, building this strong foundation for a professional life outside of the spotlight, the outside world had not entirely forgotten him. The entertainment industry had moved on, searching for the next generation of child actors to feed the machine, but the audience who had grown up watching him remained. The public, accustomed to neatly resolved narratives, struggled with his abrupt departure. Because Saviano had exited the public stage so quietly, leaving no trail of interviews or subsequent acting roles to update his image in the public consciousness, a void was created. People who had spent their formative years watching him every Wednesday night suddenly found themselves with internet access and a lingering curiosity about what had happened to the boy in the glasses. They looked for updates but found none. The quiet, diligent life of a Yale political science student does not generate headlines. In the absence of factual information, the collective imagination of the early internet began to construct its own narrative. The public required an explanation for his disappearance that fit their dramatic expectations of Hollywood. They were about to generate a myth so wildly disconnected from reality that it would become a defining case study in the power of digital folklore. The mid to late 1990s witnessed a fundamental restructuring of human communication. The internet transitioned from a niche academic and military tool into a mainstream consumer product. Millions of households connected to early internet service providers, navigating slow dial-up connections to access chat rooms, message boards, and primitive web pages. This new digital frontier was largely unmapped and unregulated. It was an environment perfectly calibrated for the rapid dissemination of unverified information. Before the existence of search engine algorithms designed to prioritize authoritative sources, and long before the concept of social media fact-checking, a compelling story could spread globally within days based entirely on momentum and word of mouth. In this specific digital climate, the absence of factual information was treated as an open invitation to invent it. Because Josh Saviano had intentionally removed himself from the public record, a massive digital canvas was left blank. In the absence of facts, early internet forums filled the void with a bizarre conspiracy. The rumor began as a whisper in obscure online forums and quickly mutated into a digital absolute truth. The claim was simple but incredibly provocative. It stated that the sweet, clumsy, and painfully wholesome Paul Pfeiffer had not simply retired from acting to pursue an education, but had undergone a violent psychological and physical metamorphosis. The story alleged that the intense pressures of childhood fame had broken his psyche, leading him to completely reinvent himself as the most feared and controversial figure in 1990s music. The rumor claimed as an undeniable fact that Josh Saviano was Marilyn Manson. The rumor gained massive traction because it fed off the specific cultural anxieties of the era. Marilyn Manson, whose real name is Brian Warner, was the ultimate nightmare for conservative suburban America. He was a shock rocker who utilized industrial metal, grotesque theatricality, and deliberate aggressive provocations against religious and social norms to build his empire. He was the absolute mathematical antithesis of everything the Wonder Years represented. The television show was a nostalgic, warm embrace of traditional American family values. Manson was a deliberate, violent rejection of them. The sheer distance between the two personas is exactly what made the rumor so sticky. The public possesses a deep-seated, often unacknowledged cynicism regarding child stars. Society actively expects these young performers to fail. We are conditioned by decades of tabloid journalism to anticipate that a perfectly sanitized childhood, manufactured for television, must inevitably result in a damaged, corrupted adulthood. The narrative of the fallen child actor is a recognized and heavily consumed cultural trope. When a child star quietly goes to college and lives a normal, productive life, it deprives the public of this expected dramatic arc. It is viewed as boring. The Marilyn Manson rumor supplied the missing drama. It offered a narrative of ultimate corruption. It suggested that the wholesome exterior of Paul Pfeiffer was merely a fragile, artificial shell that eventually cracked, revealing a dark, chaotic, and angry core. People desperately wanted to believe it because it validated their darkest cynical assumptions about the Hollywood machine destroying its young. The mechanics of how this rumor spread provide a fascinating study in early internet sociology. Without centralized platforms like modern social networks, the rumor propagated through forwarded emails, primitive fan sites, and playground conversations that migrated onto instant messenger clients. It became a piece of shared cultural trivia. People would casually state it as a verified fact at dinner parties or in college dormitories. The physical resemblance between the two men was minimal at best, perhaps limited to a slightly similar facial structure if one completely ignored the heavy theatrical makeup worn by the musician. Logically, the timeline made absolutely no sense. Brian Warner was born in 1969, making him 7 years older than Saviano. While Saviano was actively filming the final seasons of his television show, Warner was already forming his band and performing in Florida. A basic verification of public records would have instantly dismantled the myth. But in 1997, the average internet user did not possess the tools, the inclination, or the digital literacy to cross-reference birth certificates and production schedules. The truth was mundane and quiet. The lie was thrilling and loud. Therefore, the lie became the accepted reality for millions of people. While this bizarre digital mythology was metastasizing across the globe, Josh Saviano was completely insulated from it in the physical reality of New Haven, Connecticut. He was focused entirely on completing his demanding degree in political science. When the rumor eventually reached him, it did not provoke outrage or a desperate public relations campaign to correct the record. He viewed it with a mixture of amusement and sociological interest. He recognized it for exactly what it was, which is a projection of public anxiety and a direct byproduct of the information vacuum he had deliberately created by leaving the industry. He did not issue angry denials. He did not hire publicists to comb the internet and demand retractions from webmasters. He understood a fundamental rule of media that many celebrities fail to grasp, which is that engaging with a rumor only feeds it, providing the oxygen of attention that these digital myths require to survive and grow. By completely ignoring it, he maintained his absolute control over his own narrative. His silence was a strategic assertion of his privacy. He allowed the internet to have its fictional monster while he continued the rigorous, quiet work of building his actual adult life. Graduating from Yale presented the next critical juncture in his journey. He had successfully dismantled the child star identity and proven his intellectual capabilities in a demanding, highly competitive academic environment. However, a degree in political science is a foundation, not a specific career path. He needed to translate this academic success into a concrete professional reality. He required a profession that offered stability, intellectual challenge, and most importantly, a clear metric for success that was entirely divorced from public opinion. The entertainment industry evaluates success based on subjective, highly volatile criteria such as popularity, physical appearance, and shifting market trends. Saviano actively sought a field governed by objective rules, logic, and rigorous structural analysis. He chose to pursue the law. The decision to enter the legal profession was not a random pivot, but a logical extension of his academic trajectory. The study of law, like political science, requires the ability to dismantle complex arguments, understand the historical precedent of rules, and construct defensible positions based strictly on evidence rather than emotion or popularity. Furthermore, the legal profession commands a level of inherent respect that is completely immune to the fickle nature of celebrity culture. A successful attorney is judged solely by their ability to win cases, negotiate complex contracts, and fiercely protect their clients' interests. It is a profession rooted in tangible, verifiable results. To achieve this ambitious goal, Saviano returned to his home state and enrolled at the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law in New York City. Moving from the Gothic, isolated academic bubble of Yale to the relentless, kinetic energy of New York City marked a significant transition. Cardozo Law School, located in the heart of Manhattan, is known for its rigorous curriculum and its close proximity to the epicenter of global commerce and media. Law school is notoriously demanding. It utilizes the Socratic method, a pedagogical approach where professors cold call students and aggressively question them on dense case law, forcing them to defend their reasoning in real time in front of a lecture hall full of their highly competitive peers. This environment is specifically designed to strip away ego and rebuild the students' thought processes from the ground up. It is a form of intellectual combat. For someone who had spent his early years being pampered and protected on a television set, this could have been a jarring, insurmountable shock. But Saviano had already willingly undergone the process of ego dismantling at Yale. He approached law school with the same quiet, diligent focus he had applied to his undergraduate studies, refusing to let his past define his present capabilities. During his grueling time at Cardozo, Saviano began to identify a unique and powerful professional synthesis. He realized that his past life in the entertainment industry was not a liability to be hidden away, but a profound specialized asset to be leveraged. Most law students studying intellectual property or entertainment law approach the subject from a purely theoretical, academic perspective. They read about contracts, residuals, royalty structures, and the exploitation of creative rights in dry textbooks. Saviano had literally lived it. He understood the mechanical daily reality of how a television show is actually produced, how actors are compensated or exploited, and how the massive corporate machinery of a broadcast network operates behind closed doors. He had first-hand, intimate experience with the predatory nature of the industry and the specific vulnerabilities of young creatives navigating it. He realized he could take his highly specialized insider knowledge and seamlessly combine it with his newly acquired formidable legal expertise. He was no longer running away from his Hollywood past. He was preparing to weaponize it to protect others who were standing exactly where he used to be. Upon graduating from the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law and successfully passing the notoriously grueling New York State Bar examination, Josh Saviano officially transitioned from a former television actor into a practicing attorney. He did not leverage his past fame to seek out high-profile celebrity criminal cases that would guarantee immediate media coverage and keep his name in the tabloids. He actively avoided the performative aspects of the legal profession. Instead, he chose to enter the highly structured, intensely demanding environment of corporate and commercial law in Manhattan. He secured a position at Morris & Cohen, a highly respected mid-sized law firm known for its rigorous standards and complex corporate litigation. The environment of a prominent New York law firm is the absolute antithesis of a Hollywood soundstage. It is a world entirely devoid of glamour. At Morris & Cohen, a prominent New York law firm, his past as Paul Pfeiffer was irrelevant. Success here demanded grueling hours, dense contractual analysis, and flawless legal briefs by 6 a.m. Saviano proved his endurance from the ground up, exactly like every other junior associate. He applied the same diligent, quiet focus that had carried him through Yale and law school. Over the years, he systematically climbed the strict hierarchy of the firm. He transitioned from a junior associate to a senior associate and ultimately achieved the position of partner. Becoming a partner at a Manhattan law firm is a definitive marker of elite professional success. It requires not only exceptional legal acumen, but also the ability to generate significant business, build immense trust with corporate clients, and navigate the complex internal politics of a major firm. Reaching this tier of the legal profession validated his decision to leave the entertainment industry. He had successfully built a formidable, highly respected career based entirely on his own intellect and relentless work ethic. As he established his legal career, Saviano began to specialize in an area where his unique background provided an unparalleled advantage. He focused heavily on intellectual property law, commercial transactions, and corporate structuring for brands and individuals. He understood the architecture of the entertainment industry better than almost any traditional attorney because he had been a central component of its machinery. He eventually stepped away from the traditional law firm structure to co-found his own firm, Act III Advisors. This move demonstrated a high level of entrepreneurial confidence. The stated purpose of this firm was to provide strategic counsel to creatives, influencers, and established artists, helping them protect their brands and navigate the increasingly complex intersection of media and commerce. The mission of Act III Advisors highlights a critical flaw in the entertainment industry that Saviano was uniquely positioned to address. The industry is fundamentally designed to exploit creative talent. Actors, writers, and musicians are trained to focus on their craft, to seek artistic validation, and to rely on representatives to handle the business aspects of their careers. This often leaves them highly vulnerable to predatory contracts, unfavorable royalty structures, and a complete loss of control over their own intellectual property. Saviano recognized that creatives are often terrible business people because the industry actively discourages them from understanding the mechanics of how their art is monetized. He stepped into this void not just as a lawyer, but as a highly strategic advisor. He offered creatives a logical defensive framework. When a young artist sat across the desk from him seeking legal counsel, they were not just speaking to a corporate attorney in a suit. They were speaking to someone who had survived the exact same machine they were currently navigating. He possessed an inherent credibility that could not be manufactured. He knew exactly how network contracts were structured to disadvantage the performer. He knew the hidden clauses regarding merchandising and syndication rights. He used his formidable legal expertise to dismantle these predatory structures and ensure that his clients maintained sovereignty over their own careers and financial futures. The visual contrast between the public memory of Josh Saviano and his actual adult reality is striking. The collective cultural memory preserves him as the awkward, allergy-prone teenager in the suburban basement. The reality is a sharp, decisive man wearing a meticulously tailored suit, sitting in a high-rise boardroom in Manhattan, negotiating multi-million-dollar commercial transactions. He did not merely survive the psychological gauntlet of childhood fame. He mastered the underlying legal machinery that had manufactured his early identity. This represents the ultimate victory over identity foreclosure. He built a formidable legal career that proved his intellect extended far beyond a childhood script. Because his present life was so secure, Saviano possessed a psychological luxury that eludes many former child stars. He possessed the ability to look back at his past without resentment. A common, predictable trope in the entertainment industry involves former child actors engaging in a public, often bitter repudiation of the roles that made them famous. They write sensationalist memoirs, they refuse to answer questions about their early shows during interviews, and they publicly express intense anger toward the industry, the fans, and often their own parents. This bitterness is usually a symptom of a stalled career. When an actor cannot generate new success, they inevitably resent the old success that continues to define them. Saviano exhibited none of this bitterness. He completely rejected the narrative of the damaged child star. Because he had achieved elite success in an entirely different, highly respected field, he did not view Paul Pfeiffer as an anchor dragging down his current ambitions. He viewed the character as a distinct, closed chapter of a highly unusual childhood. This allowed him to engage with his past from a position of absolute strength and emotional maturity. He never attempted to hide his association with the Wonder Years. He embraced the legacy of the show because he understood the profound positive impact it had on a generation of viewers. He maintained close, genuine relationships with his former castmates, particularly Fred Savage and Danica McKellar. The entertainment industry is notorious for transactional, superficial friendships that dissolve the moment a production wraps. The enduring bond between the core cast of this specific show is a testament to the grounded environment they maintained amidst the chaos of fame. Saviano frequently appeared at official reunions, public panels, and retrospective events celebrating the show. When he attended these events, he was not a desperate former actor trying to wring a final moment of relevance from a decades-old television program. He was a highly successful New York attorney taking a brief, enjoyable vacation back into his past. His interactions with fans reflect this same healthy compartmentalization. When recognized on the street by people who still instinctively call him Paul, he does not react with frustration or demand to be addressed by his real name. He meets the recognition with a genuine, warm acknowledgement. He understands the mechanics of nostalgia. He knows that when a fan approaches him, they are not trying to insult his current legal career. They are trying to connect with a piece of their own childhood. It requires immense psychological security to allow strangers to project a fictional identity onto you and simply accept it with grace. Saviano can afford to be gracious because a passing reference to Paul Pfeiffer cannot threaten the solid, undeniable reality of attorney Josh Saviano. In 2015, this synthesis of his past and present culminated in a highly unexpected return to the screen. After an absence of over 2 decades, Josh Saviano accepted an acting role on a major network television show. He was cast in Law and Order Special Victims Unit, a cornerstone of the massive, highly successful Dick Wolf television franchise. The role was not a nostalgic cameo or a comedic nod to his past. He played Don Taft, a sharp, aggressive defense attorney representing clients in a high-stakes Manhattan courtroom. He appeared in multiple episodes across the 17th season of the series. This return to television is a fascinating piece of meta-commentary on his own life. The decision to accept the role was entirely unburdened by financial necessity or a desperate need to restart an acting career. He did not need the paycheck, and he did not need the exposure. He accepted the role simply because the opportunity presented a unique intellectual and creative crossover. He was stepping onto a soundstage to play a legal professional, utilizing the specific cadence, vocabulary, and authoritative posture he employed every day in his actual corporate legal practice. The visual impact of this appearance for the audience was powerful. The demographic that watched Law and Order Special Victims Unit was largely the exact same demographic that had grown up watching The Wonder Years. Seeing Saviano on screen triggered an immediate, complex reaction. It forced the audience to simultaneously process their memory of the timid 12-year-old boy and the reality of the formidable adult man delivering sharp legal objections before a judge. He was acting, but he was projecting a completely authentic authority. He wore the tailored suit and commanded the courtroom with the effortless precision of a man who actually knew how to dismantle a witness on the stand. This specific television appearance finalized his absolute control over his public narrative. By returning to the medium that had defined his youth, he demonstrated that he was no longer intimidated by it. He proved that he could walk back into the Hollywood machinery, participate in it on his own highly specific terms, and then walk right back out to his actual life in New York. The industry no longer dictated his value or his schedule. He participated strictly for his own amusement and intellectual satisfaction. He had entirely reversed the power dynamic. The final episode of a television series often serves as a cultural touchstone, particularly for shows that have deeply infiltrated the public consciousness. In May 1993, the broadcast of the final episode of The Wonder Years was treated as a significant event by the American viewing public. The creators of the show faced the difficult task of providing closure for characters that millions of people had watched grow from children into young adults. They opted for a conclusion that was steeped in realism rather than offering a simplistic, neatly tied Hollywood ending. The finale acknowledged that childhood friendships rarely remain static, and that the people we rely on in our youth often follow divergent paths as they enter adulthood. The closing moments of the series featured a nostalgic montage narrated by the adult version of the protagonist looking back on his formative years. The narrator provided a brief summary of the ultimate fates of the central characters, offering the audience a glimpse into their fictional futures. When addressing the character of the loyal best friend, the narrator explicitly stated that Paul went to college back east and then attended Harvard for law school. The voiceover concluded the character arc by revealing that Paul was currently living and working as an attorney in New York. The writers deliberately chose this specific outcome to honor the intelligence and the steady, pragmatic nature of the character they had spent 6 years developing. They wanted to reassure the audience that the awkward, vulnerable boy who struggled through middle school had ultimately found his footing and achieved a respectable, sophisticated adulthood. It was a dignified exit written for a beloved character, ensuring that Paul Pfeiffer would remain a successful figure in the collective imagination of the audience. However, in the context of the entertainment industry, these fictional epilogues are almost always entirely disconnected from the real lives of the actors who portray them. The idealized future, written into a script, stands in stark contrast to the frequently turbulent and disappointing realities faced by former child stars once the cameras stop rolling. A rare symmetry exists between the fictional fate written for his character and the actual trajectory he chose for himself. The writers of the show envisioned a future where Paul pursued elite higher education on the East Coast and subsequently established a formidable legal career in New York City. Through sheer intellectual discipline and a refusal to remain tethered to his past, Saviano essentially manifested that exact fictional destiny into reality. He did not attend Harvard as the script dictated, but he achieved the exact equivalent by securing his undergraduate degree from Yale University and his Juris Doctor from the Cardozo School of Law. He ultimately built a highly successful career as a corporate attorney operating in the heart of Manhattan. The narrative written for the character in 1993 became the absolute reality for the actor decades later. This alignment is exceedingly rare in the history of television. It represents a unique instance where the deeply positive projection of a fictional narrative perfectly matches the real-world achievement of the human being who brought that narrative to life. The character and the actor, despite being separated by the boundary of the television screen, ultimately arrived at the exact same professional destination. This parallel offers a fascinating perspective on the concept of narrative control. In the entertainment industry, actors are fundamentally tools used to execute a vision designed by producers, writers, and network executives. They are handed a script and told exactly what to say, where to stand, and how to emote. Their identities are shaped and marketed by corporate entities seeking to maximize viewership and advertising revenue. The child actor in particular has zero agency in this process. They are a product manufactured for public consumption, and when their utility expires, they are typically discarded by the machinery that built them. Saviano rejected this dynamic entirely. He recognized that if he remained in Los Angeles, his life would continue to be dictated by the narrow imaginations of casting directors and the impossible expectations of a nostalgic public. By walking away from the industry, he took absolute ownership of his own script. He transitioned from being a passive participant in a fictional narrative to being the active, definitive author of his own reality. He proved that the end of a television show does not have to signal the end of an individual's relevance or ambition. It can merely be the conclusion of a highly unusual childhood chapter, serving as the foundation for a much more substantial adult life. The persistent internet myth of Paul Pfeiffer transforming into a shock rocker ultimately says more about societal cynicism than it does about Josh Saviano. While the public eagerly awaited a tragic Hollywood downfall, Saviano staged a rebellion of quiet competence. He subverted expectations not through chaotic behavior, but by mastering a complex profession and building a sustainable private life. In a culture that continually rewards chaotic behavior and public meltdowns with increased attention, a successful, quiet transition into professional adulthood is the ultimate act of defiance. Saviano demonstrated that a person does not have to be defined by the role they were assigned in their youth, nor do they have to destroy themselves to prove they have changed. He achieved the hardest task any former child star faces, which is simply growing up and becoming a functional, highly capable adult operating outside the spotlight. For the generation of viewers who grew up alongside his character, this reality offers a profound and deeply satisfying sense of resolution. The audience that watched the Wonder Years in their own youth are now mature adults, navigating the complexities of their own lives and careers. Discovering the true outcome of Josh Saviano's journey validates the emotional investment they made in the show decades ago. It is immensely reassuring to know that the young man who portrayed the smart, awkward kid they related to actually won in the end. He did not become a cautionary tale or a tragic footnote in television history. He found his place in the world, commanded respect in a demanding field, and established a legacy built on his own intellect and hard work. Ultimately, the question of what really happened to the boy who played Paul Pfeiffer yields one of the most inspiring answers in the history of the entertainment industry. He stepped completely out of the frame that Hollywood built for him, leaving the fictional character safely preserved in the nostalgic landscape of the late 1960s. He walked into the real world and built a life defined by sovereignty, professionalism, and undeniable competence. Paul Pfeiffer remains perfectly preserved in a 1960s nostalgic landscape, but Josh Saviano's real triumph was stepping out of that fictional frame to build a life on his own terms.